Well, welcome to Richie's Roost, Shaco, Mississippi. We actually got a little rain yesterday. I'd almost forgotten what it was like. But we've had beautiful weather other than that, and we needed it. Beautiful again today. A couple of weeks ago, I promised to tell you a few things about James Earl you may not have known. My old friend James Earl, who is no longer with us, but who was a remarkable person. He really was. And I'll talk about a few things today, but there'll be a lot of things left out, and we'll get to those at another time maybe, because it's just be too long to cover them all at one spot, and I'm not sure I could remember all of them anyway. He was a special person. I said in one of the first videos I talked about, he's short, hard of hearing, bad to cuss. Got a face to stop a 7-day clock and will instantly give you a very definite and loud opinion on anything, whether he knows a dang thing about the subject or not. But he's one of my favorite people in the world. He, career-wise, started sweeping the floor at an outfit called School Pictures in Jackson, Mississippi, when he was 17 years old. Started sweeping the floor. He wound up in his career managing that plant. He worked for a man named Jim Whidden, who was the president of School Pictures. Back in those days, they had the big old rolls of pictures, and they had all kinds of developmental problems. And he and Jim were a great team. Jim Whidden was one of the smartest people I ever met, followed very closely, really, by James Earl. They invented more things to assist taking quality pictures at that outfit than had ever been done before. They just invented or improved the machinery that was there. And he also did some very innovative things other than just the machinery work. An example, we were talking one day about I had just formed my little outfit, and I had hired some people. And he was talking about some of the hires that he had made. And he said, we were always looking for ways to improve those pictures. And the dark room had one little red light up above it so that we could, you've seen pictures of those dark rooms where they're developing the old film a long time ago before they were taking digital pictures. Now, these are people who are a little older than 20 years old. But they had a dark room, and they couldn't use light because that affected the quality of the picture, so they'd use a little red light bulb up there, and that's all light they had. James Earl started wondering about how they could improve it. He didn't know how, other than have the room totally dark, but that would create some problems with folks moving around in the machinery and understanding it, reading the gauges, that kind of thing. And then he had a thought. He told me, he said, the best hire that I think I ever made, that I have been the most proud of, that worked out so well, was I hired a blind man to run that machinery in the dark room. Of course, he didn't need any light, and because he was blind, he had developed, as blind people and other people who have physical ailments do, they make up for that loss. He could hear strange noises better than anybody I ever saw, and could also put his hand on a machine and determine whether it was running right or not. He ran my dark room for years and years, and I have never been so proud of a person in my life. He was wonderful. But that's the kind of thing he did. He was innovative. He was very innovative when it came to stories and storytelling. So he was full of surprises. When I first saw him, he was one of the first people that moved out here after we did in Shaco. Jim Whidden was here before we were. I'll tell you a story about him one day when we got a little slack time. But he was telling me one day that he had taken some pictures down. He had taken pictures of John Wayne and James Stewart, Ronald Reagan, Nancy Reagan. I said, yeah, fine, sure. He said, well, when we get home, I'll show you. So he starts pulling out these pictures that he had made. And he had seen John Wayne and James Stewart and Ronald Reagan and Nancy, not only Nancy Reagan, but, well, when you take those pictures like that and you have somebody like Ronald Reagan in the session that you're taking pictures of, the special forces there have you standing at a particular spot, and that's where you stood, and you did not get out of there. They had their places to take, and he had an X marked on the floor where he was supposed to stand and take pictures from there. He had a reputation about taking good ones, so that's the reason they always called him, most of the city people and the law enforcement people, including the FBI, he and Roy Moore, who was the special agent, FBI in charge of Jackson, and James Earl got to be very good friends because not only did he take pictures of celebrities like that, but he also was hired to go out and take photographs of accident scenes, that type of thing, because he's very good at it. He did not like to talk about those very much. He said those were just things that you try to put out of your mind. He said some of them were awful. But anyway, that was one of the things that he did. He also was not shy about going up and talking to people. Like one night, he was telling me that he was in a hotel somewhere. He was on some kind of a photography seminar or something, and was sitting by himself at the bar. Looked over and at the table, in a table in the corner. He thought he recognized a man, but he wasn't sure. But he was by himself. And James Earl just decided he'd just saunter over there and introduce himself and sit down and have his drink with the guy and talk with him, chat with him. He would do that in a heartbeat. Turned out that the person he went over to see was James Arness, the big Gunsmoke cowboy. And he said they sat there and talked for about 3.5 hours. Arness didn't have anybody to talk to either. So he said they had a really good time, enjoyed it, and kept a correspondence going for a long time. He also, right out of high school, before he actually got involved in any management type things at school pictures, he married Sweet Hazel. Best move he ever made. They only stayed married till his death after about, I think it was 70 years of marriage. I know it was 70, it might have been 71. So he kept telling me that he thought it was going to work out. There was a love between those two that was almost fierce. She loved him and he adored her. They were a joy to be around when they were together. Now, that didn't mean that there were not some caustic things said and some jokes told. And I'm not sure I'd have been comfortable telling mine, but they both loved it, and it was wonderful to see them together. Anyway, they got married right out of high school. Now, Hazel had a brother. He was a sergeant in the Army, and he and James Earl did not get along too well together because he was so doggone organized. James Earl said, I have never been around a more organized person in my life. They fished sometime together, and he said his tackle box was the most organized piece of equipment I have ever seen. He said he might have 200 lures, but they were lined up by size, by color, by under, over, mid, surface lures, right down. He said, I just got to thinking, there's no use in anybody being that doggone organized all the time. So they were fishing also with some minnows, and James Earl slipped a couple of minnows in the tackle box back in the back section. And his brother-in-law didn't discover it until a couple of weeks later when it got so bad in their house they couldn't stay there. He finally tracked the smell down and realized where it came from, and that created a little course of conversation. But James Earl told him he was sorry. He just put them in there and forgot them. And it worked out all right. He also did some things sometimes that could have created some really problems. had he not been known by some people. Like, for example, I told you he knew Roy Moore, the FBI special agent. Well, Martin Luther King and his entourage came to Jackson during the 60s. This was a tough time in Mississippi. It was a hard time. But James Earl decided that he would become a one-man welcoming committee to them and found out that they were staying at the Sun and Sand Hotel in Jackson. So when he was sure they were all there, first afternoon they were there, he shows up, knocked on the door, and Martin Luther King did not come to the door, but some of his staff did. And here stands little short James Earl holding a big watermelon and said he just wanted to welcome them to Jackson, Mississippi. Well, he thought that was funny and that would be accepted as a kind of a joke. They were not pleased. and they informed law enforcement that there was they weren't real sure about this person, so they had to be very careful. Well, that created a little uproar. James Earl said he was home. Of course, they gave the FBI the description. James Earl was home and his telephone rang. He picked it up and it was Roy Moore, the lead FBI man. And he said, James Earl, let me ask you a question. He said, what? He said, did you go to the Southern Sand today and offer them a watermelon? James Earl said, yeah. I just thought I'd be, nice. That they didn't seem too friendly, so I just left. Roy said, you cannot imagine the uproar. You've got everything in. Please don't do anything like that again. I'm glad they did have a description of you. I could call you and tell you, stay the hell at home. Don't do anything like that anymore. James Earl said, okay. So he did. And there was one afternoon not too long ago. I'm going to wrap it up with this because we're getting pretty long. We'll get into some later on. But I was talking to him about my upcoming 85th birthday. And I told him that I had told Perry I wanted to do a skydive. If you've followed this channel, you've seen the skydiving movie that Perry and I made. I told him I wanted to go do a skydive first time. I said, I'm really looking forward to that. I think that'd be fun. He said, it wasn't for me. I said, did you do a skydive, really? No. He said, I didn't jump like you're talking about, but I jumped. I made a bunch of jumps. I said, where? He said, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I was in the 101st Airborne Division. I said, what? I had no idea you were even in the Army. He said, well, I was in the National Guard. This was back in the days of the Korean War. And he said, we got called up, and he split us into two groups from Jackson and sent some of us to the 101st Airborne Division, and that's where I went. And he said, I actually did more jumps than most of the folks did. And I said, well, why is that? What kind of trouble did you get into to make you have to do all those jumps? He said, I didn't get you trouble. He said, they found out I knew how to take pictures. And he said, in those days, most of the pictures made of paratroopers were made either from the plane or from the ground. And he said, they found out I knew how to handle a camera. So they had me jumping with a camera instead of a rifle, taking pictures of the paratroopers as we were coming down. They were right on my level with me. So, but I never did get to where I really enjoyed that. He said, you just never know when you bail out of one of them planes by yourself what's going to happen. He said, I wouldn't do that if I was you. Well, of course, we did it anyway and did have a good time, enjoyed it. But he said, given the choice, I wouldn't do it, which makes me a lot smarter than you. I said, well, you're probably right. I'll tell you, he was one of my favorite people. You have few really good friends that you can depend on, and I guarantee you I could depend on him for anything if I needed it. I knew he'd back me up on anything I wanted to try to do. He was a good man. He's gone now, and Hazel she's having conversations with other people that aren't in the room now. She'll join him before too long, I hope, and I know he can't wait for that. Anyway, we'll get into some other stories that he told. There are some really good ones, too. I can't wait to tell you. Remind me Oh, one thing before I leave, you remember last time I was talking about him, there was a fly buzzing around me all the time. I was swatting that fly. And one of my elementary school classmates from Brookhaven, Mississippi, saw that and emailed me back and said, I was talking about James Earl. She said, do you think that fly was an accident? Which is pretty insightful. I tell you, Judy, I'm glad you brought that up, but be honest with you, I'm not sure it was an accident. I would not put it past him. He's probably sitting up there on a stump with a bunch of folks around him, saw that fly down there and said, hey, y'all, watch this. Oh, man, I wouldn't bet against it. I'm Jim Ritchie. I'll see you again next time.